All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Birthplace of Country Music's monthly speaker sessions. We are very glad to have you here with us. And we are especially glad to have our guest, Jen Larson, who I will introduce properly in a minute. But first, just a few quick housekeeping things. This is the first time in a while that we've done a fully Zoom focused talk. So I'm trying to remember all the things that we do when it's only Zoom. Um, One is to please stay muted, so have your microphone turned off and also your video off during the conversation and the presentation. And that's simply so that the Zoom focuses in on Jen and Jen alone while she is speaking. We will be doing an audience Q&A after Jen's presentation. If you have any questions that you want to share with her, please write them in the chat, and we will be sure to facilitate all of those questions with her after she gets through with her presentation. Finally, we always send out a feedback survey, usually within a day or two of the program. These are so helpful to us to help us figure out possible new programs in the future, things that we can do better, things that are going great. So if you have time, and it's usually only a 2 or 3 minute survey, please do that when it comes through your mailbox. But now to the main event. We're very excited to be sharing tonight's program with you. We have Jen Larson here, who is going to be giving us a behind-the-scenes view of the Grand Ole Opry archives. The Grand Ole Opry archives are comprised of thousands of photographs and live recordings from some of the most significant artists in the history of American music. The archive spans decades and includes photographs, interviews, performances, and appearances by both country and non-country artists at the height of their careers. Jen will be sharing several interesting country music artifacts and collections that represent nearly a century of legendary programming with an iconic roster of artist members of the Opry. So this is going to be a really interesting evening. A quick introduction to our speaker before I hand it over to her. Jen Larson is the archives manager for the Grand Ole Opry Archives, and she also serves on the board of trustees for the Bluegrass Music Hall of Fame and Museum. While simultaneously developing her career in museum collections and archives management, over the years, she has also garnered critical praise with the bluegrass brand Straight Drive, and she's performed widely in concert series and music festivals. Additionally, Jen has shared her passion for bluegrass music through educational programs at Carnegie Hall and the Lincoln Center, a U.S. State Department Goodwill Tour, and the Augusta Heritage Center. And if I'm not mistaken, she has actually performed at the Birthplace of Country Music Museum right after we opened. And that might be a question for later, but I'm going to hand it over to you, Jen. Welcome. We are so glad to have you here. And let's get started. And remember, everyone, if you have any questions, put them in the chat and we will be happy to facilitate those once we get to the end of the presentation.
Great. Renee, thanks for that fabulous introduction. I really appreciate that. And I'm delighted to be here with all of you. I see a few familiar names. Shout out to Fred Bartenstein, someone that I admire as a scholar and historian and fellow traveler in bluegrass. That's wonderful. And I'm just so delighted that we're here to spend this time together. And I hope that the information that I have is interesting, informative, and that we have a great time exploring the Grand Ole Opry archives together. So what I'm going to do to get started is to share my screen because I have a PowerPoint all ready to go. Let's see here. Okay, share. That'll do it. There we go. Is everybody seeing the PowerPoint? I'm assuming so. Yeah, we got thumbs up. Good. Okay.
Yeah, we can see it.
Perfect. If you're having any trouble, just let us know because I don't want to start marching on without you. Oops. I guess I'm on a timer. I'll have to be careful about that. So just to make a broad introduction before we sort of jump into the archives, I just want to give you sort of the main overview of where we are and what, where we sit in relation to the larger corporate structure, because we are not a museum, although the Opry did have a museum at one point. We are a corporate archives, and we reside within Ryman Hospitality Properties, which is a large company here in Nashville that owns Opry Entertainment, which is the division that the Opry Archive sits in, but also the Grand Ole Opry, the Ryman Auditorium, WSM, the radio station, Ole Red, Austin City Limits property, and also Circle TV. So as part of that whole business portfolio, the Grand Ole Opry Archives sits tucked amongst all of those business activities. So that just gives you just the broadest of overviews of where we are. And we're located in Nashville, Tennessee, adjacent to the Grand Ole Opry House.
Hey, Jen, real quick, a couple of people have said that they can't hear you very well. So do you mind to move your microphone a little bit?
Yeah, let me see what I can do about turning it up too.
Oh, that sounds much better on my end too. So I think that's good.
How's that?
Yeah, I think that's made a difference. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you for that note. Yeah, so moving forward to give you a closer look at the collection, as Renee had mentioned, what our collection scope is. It includes a lot of images, and that is growing literally on a weekly basis because the show is digitally photographed and videotaped 3 nights a week on our show nights. But our archive and the thing that is really of interest to me is that it goes back to the very beginning of WSM in 1925. So that's a really big and interesting photo collection to have. We also have our video material, and that actually begins in the 1950s with the Grand Ole Opry Live television show that was on starting in 1955, which is, just as a quick side note, I'm curating an exhibit that's going to launch in in May, that is going to feature the history of guests of the Grand Ole Opry. And I'm actually going to start with Les Paul and Mary Ford and also Margaret Whiting. And that points back to the earliest video that we have in the Grand Ole Opry Archives collection. So that's kind of exciting. Of course, we have musical instruments. Some of the backdrop signs, not many. Those were well used over time, and that combined with the flood in 2010, we've lost a lot of the larger pieces of signage over the years. But we also have a lot of props, not only from the Grand Ole Opry, the comedians and what have you, but also Hee Haw is one of our collections. So we actually have a lot of Hee Haw props from the television show, which is kind of fun to encounter in the archive. Let's see. Core collections, which I'll get to a little bit later, but just to mention them here, the personal and professional artifacts of Opry members, 1925 to the present. Of course, we have a lovely stageware collection. It's not nearly as broad-ranging and large as the Country Music Hall of Fame, but it really focuses on Opry members. And we have probably about 100 nudie suits all told, which is really fabulous. Handwritten lyric sheets, scripts. We have actually a full set of, not a full set, but a set of Minnie Pearl's Prince Albert show scripts, which are really incredible because they're annotated with her jokes. And so we see her creative mind at work. And then we have things like business documents, images, and ephemera relating to the parent company of the Grand Ole Opry Archives, which is the National Life and Accident Insurance Company. That's the company that started this whole thing when they decided to launch a radio station, WSM, in 1925. The Grand Ole Opry, then called the WSM Barn Dance, gave the music a platform back then. And I mentioned Hee Haw. We also have some business and interesting PR materials for the Gaylord Opryland Hotel, which is a whole other side of the business, and also the much beloved and much missed Opryland theme park. And we are open by appointment only, so people cannot walk into the archive, but they can contact me or somebody else at the company, and I'm happy to receive research visits. So starting with our photo collections, I just wanted to give you guys an overview of some of the really notable photographers that we've worked, or that the Opry has had over the years. Some of these names may be familiar to you, some may not, but a lot of the images might be if you have read any comprehensive book about country music history. We license a lot of our photos that we have, and as does the Country Music Hall of Fame. And our collections do have quite a bit of overlap. So a lot, when you see these names listed here, you can also go on to the website of the Country Music Hall of Fame and see examples of their photography of both the Opry and also just country music in general. Just to clarify for a minute, because a lot of people do get this confused, and even Opry members sometimes do, that our archive, the Grand Ole Opry Archives, is entirely separate as a business entity from the Hall of Fame, although our collections certainly have a lot in common. Okay. And so I just want to show you some of the real.
Jen, I'm going to just interrupt one more time. Someone else is still having trouble with the volume or hearing you. And I'm not sure what the issue is. I can hear you fine, but I just wanted to point it out real quick.
Yeah, let me see. I'm messing now with the volume on my microphone. I don't know.
Yeah, and I could definitely hear a little bit of a difference when you were leaning forward.
Okay. The microphone is pretty much in front of my mouth right now. I'm not sure what the deal is.
No, I think that's gotten better. But like I said, I could hear you fairly well, but it seems like maybe it's just a small issue, but we've got it fixed, it sounds like. So thank you.
Yeah. Should we just do a quick sound check? If anybody else is having a problem, can you send, because I'm not looking at the notes, the chat notes right now.
Yeah, if anyone else is having a problem, let us know in the chat, and then we'll jump back into the presentation.
Yeah, exactly. So,
hey, Jen, tap on the other side of your mic like that your mouth isn't close to.
Oh, I wonder if that's what it is. Check, check, check. Is that better? I wonder if this mic is, I'm not sure if it's on a cardioid pattern or what.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. So that's why I wanted to check that. I think sometimes on those mics where the volume is probably the side you talk in, but I don't know for sure.
All right. I did just flip the mic entirely around. Is that any better, folks?
I think it's definitely better.
Okay, maybe that's what the deal is. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. Let me just sort of reposition myself here. All right. Yeah, please, definitely. I don't want to march ahead if people aren't able to hear me clearly. So I just want to make sure we're good. I see. Yeah. Okay. All right. Please let us know if there's still a problem. So I just wanted to show you some of the real superstars of the collection. This iconic photo from 1947. This has been published in a lot of different places, but it's such a fantastic photo. Okay. And here are some other great historic images that we have in the collection that are available for licensing. Some of these you may have seen actually in the Ken Burns country music series. It's kind of exciting. The Opry spent about 10 years working with Florentine Films on compiling and licensing hundreds of photographs for that remarkable series that he produced. I've been with the Opry for 7 years, so I was lucky enough to get to take that project over the finish line. But my predecessor, Brenda Colliday, who's also a great scholar and caretaker for the Opry collection historically, she also worked with Florentine Films quite a bit, I think, during her tenure at the archives. But these are some fabulous photos of very young Johnny Cash there. And I'm not sure if any of you follow auction houses or, country music memorabilia that comes up for sale every so often. This is kind of interesting, or really interesting, actually. If you're interested in Hank Williams, this is a rare color image. It's a 35 millimeter slide that we acquired from the Jimmy Dickens estate in 2017. Jimmy Dickens passed away, and his estate decided to put everything in auction up in Boston. And one of the first jobs that I had, among the first jobs that I started in 2016, August of 2016, was to go up to to Boston and bid on this material and bring it back to Nashville. And this is one of the remarkable treasures. There's a lot of really great stuff in the Jimmy Dickens collection. He had a phenomenal career with the Opry, hugely talented individual. But this is kind of special because it's Hank Williams, Sarah Cannon, aka Minnie Pearl, and Jimmy Dickens sitting on what looks to be sort of a little luggage Jeep there. And that might be Sarah Cannon's husband's plane. He was a licensed pilot, and he would fly a lot of Opry stars around to their various gigs. So it wouldn't at all surprise me if this was some they were waiting on the tarmac for something ready to take off or just getting off the plane for a gig. But we have this beautiful photo, and if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure that we also have the suit that Hank Williams is wearing. It's a very distinctive kind of double-breasted pinstripe suit with the really big sort of late 40s, early 50s lapels. So that's really amazing that we have that rare color image. Here is some great photography. Les Leverett. I'd love to talk more about. I could do a whole presentation just on Les Leverett. For those of you that aren't familiar with him, he was our staff photographer from 1960 to 1992-93. And one of his first assignments was photographing National Life and Accident insurance events and also the early DJ conventions. But then they turned him loose at the Opry, and he was there for some really spectacular, early 60s and onward emerging artists, and seeing Patsy Cline at the top of her game there in 1961. Les was a year into the job when he took that photo, and it's just fantastic. Les also photographed some of the episodes of the Johnny Cash show. One of my favorites being this beautiful performance very late in Louis Armstrong's life, where he and Johnny Cash, I think, sang maybe Blue Yodel number 9. Fred Bartenstein can probably correct me on that if I got the wrong Blue Yodel, but if that performance is on YouTube, and it's really special. And Les Leverett was there to photograph these two titans of American music playing together. Another one of our premier collections is by the photographer Jim McGuire. Jim is actually a New Jersey boy originally, but he moved to Nashville in the 70s because he loved country music. And as I've discovered, he is a huge bluegrass music fan, which I find really great. And he was a commercial photographer. His collection pretty much, it's really beautiful portrait photography along the lines of this picture that you see of Dolly Parton. But in his spare time, he shot a series just sort of for his own enjoyment called the Nashville Portraits. And that is you can look that up online and see that group of photos that he would do sort of after his regular commercial activity. So it was a real labor of love to photograph some of the musicians. And apparently his photography studio was a really fun, happening place to hang out too. So it was a real hub for social activity. And then, of course, he took, this really incredible sort of like unicorn shot of the Ryman and a dramatic view of lightning striking over the Ryman. It really captures, like, I think that whole period, sort of the nadir of the Ryman's existence when Lower Broadway had fallen into disrepair. The Ryman itself, by this point, pigeons were flying in and out of it. And it was, being seriously discussed to tear it down. Of course, that luckily did not happen, thanks to the efforts of a lot of people, one of them including John Hartford and Emmylou Harris, who were huge champions of keeping this building. Interestingly, not all the Opry members had that same sentimentality about the building, because they didn't really. The Opry had kind of outgrown the venue in some ways, and also just from a comfort level, there was never any air conditioning or heat, so it was kind of like indoor camping, I guess, performing there, either very hot or very cold. But at any rate, Jim was at the right place at the right time with his car parked right across the street on this stormy night, and he caught this very moody portrait of the Ryman. And so to talk now a little bit about our core artifact collections, because our photos are one side of the collection, but then we also have the material culture and physical artifacts from the iconic artists of the Grand Ole Opry. And I think I pretty much sort of queued them up in chronological order of accession, but who's counting? But our collection, though, it is very important to note that Roy Acuff is the first person to have donated his memorabilia, his musical instrument collection, and also a really interesting firearm collection that he amassed. He was a collector. He loved, from everything I understand about Roy Acuff, he loved to buy, trade, and sell instruments, and he traveled the world playing music too. He did a lot of shows over in Southeast Asia in the 60s. And as a result, we have a lot of like Southeast Asian instruments in the collection, things not necessarily like the best examples of indigenous instruments, but certainly interesting things that he picked up along the way. And we have 2 sitars that somehow he acquired along the way too. But, Roy also collected things like Uncle Dave Macon banjo, which is really special to us. We also have more than one of the fiddles that he played and one of his ukuleles as well. So Roy, and also Roy established the Roy Acuff Foundation, which is really the core of the archive, which, set a course for the Opry to make a museum. That was his specific wish, that all of the things that he donated to the archive to create the archive would become the Grand Ole Opry Museum, and that's exactly what happened. Next in line was Minnie Pearl. In 1988, she donated, her estate, I believe, donated amazing items, a number of her iconic $1.98 price tag hats, the comedy scripts. We also have a box of comedy notes and joke notes. We have a number of her dresses, one of them dating back to the early 40s, very similar to late 40s, I'm sorry, very similar to what she's wearing in this photo that I picked out here. But a lot of the hee-haw era, gingham dresses, we also have a number of those. And her shoes. I have more pictures coming, so I don't want to get too hung up on that. But Marty Robbins, his estate, also donated some incredible things. And so on. Little Jimmy Dickens, we acquired the remainder of the Bill Monroe estate. So in case some of you bluegrass people out there were wondering what happened when James Monroe put the rest of the estate up for sale several years back. And that includes the name, image, and likeness of Bill Monroe. I'm happy to report that the Opry does own that and take care of it going forward, along with the remainder of his business papers and a lot of photographs and promotional materials. We also have the Tammy Wynette estate, which is everything that was left behind by Tammy and her husband, George Ritchie. So that's a really wide-ranging collection that includes some of her stage wear, not a lot of stage wear, but clothing. She was actually she loved to cook and she loved to host parties. So we have dish sets, we have champagne flutes, we have her crock pot that she would take on the tour bus. And we have also a lot of photo albums. She must have spent a lot of time on those tour buses going from date to date, just putting together these homemade photo scrapbooks. And so those actually give a really interesting snapshot of her life behind the scenes. And we also have performance photos of her. We have some lyric sheets. We have business contracts. It's really sort of a total 360 of her life. We also have baby pictures, pictures of her family. So that's actually a really intriguing collection for anybody interested. I'm not sure if some of you saw geez, I forget what it's called, but that recent TV series that was done, George and Tammy. The production folks came to us and spent a lot of time looking through Tammy's photo albums, which was really interesting. Marty Stewart, of course, in his own right, is a fabulous collector, historian, standard bearer, and flame keeper for traditional country and bluegrass music. We love Marty Stewart at the Grand Ole Opry Archives. And we've made several acquisitions from him over the years. And he's helped us build our nudie suit collection. If you're looking for a black man in black Johnny Cash suit, we have you covered. We have plenty to put on display. And actually, if you come through the Nashville airport, you'll see one of our displays there of some great Johnny Cash items from Marty Stewart's collection. So yeah, we also have a number of really amazing Hank Williams pieces, including some suits, a hat, and original lyric sheets handwritten on notebook paper by Hank himself. And right now we have one of those up on display at the Ryman Auditorium, a song called Wealth Won't Save Your Soul. So we are appreciative of Marty Stewart. And of course, I mentioned the WSM collection. I could do a whole presentation for those radio nerds out there. This is a really incredible business collection that we have that I've just scratched the surface on processing, but it's the business records, the engineering records, and programming records of WSM that start essentially from the beginning up into the mid-90s when things really went digital in terms of their business administration and documentation. There's a lot to talk about there. I could fall down a rabbit hole talking about WSM, but it's very exciting to think about the radio station as so primarily important to the existence of the Grand Ole Opry, and it continues to broadcast the Opry. It's the longest continuous country music broadcast in the United States, if not the world, and that's thanks to WSM. We also have a really great eclectic collection that represents the Ryman Auditorium, and some of that is Opry related, but the Opry was only there from 1939 to 1974, I believe. And around all that, there is a ton of other cultural, political, and musical history. So we have a lot of ephemera and documentation about the history of the Ryman and the other activities outside the Opry that took place there. And of course, I mentioned Hee Haw. We have scripts, we have photographs, we have costumes, we have props. And also, if you ever see Hee Haw in syndication on cable TV, it comes out of our department, quite literally. That's where we have the masters for the show and broadcast. Well, we don't broadcast them out, but we have digitized all of them and make them available through licensing. And here are some examples of some premier objects that we have in the collection. It gives me great delight to know that we have George D. Hayes' steamboat, the iconic steamboat whistle that he would blow at the top of every show. Let her go, boys. And so that's actually on display right now at the Ryman. That's one of our really treasured objects. We have a small collection of DeFord Bailey harmonicas, which is really amazing. I think those were acquired from DeFord, given to Roy Acuff. And of course, our version of Dorothy's Ruby Slippers, Mini Pearls performance shoes, which looks like she's walked about 10,000 miles on stage. She graced the boards with those shoes that she customized Mini Pearl. We have a number of signed Opry programs. I wish we could do an exhaustive accounting of these programs because it's really interesting to see the lineups over time. This one that we happen to have here is signed, so that's really cool. But I sort of have this slow burning project of queuing up all of the programs that I can find. Part of Roy Acuff's collection, this is probably the most valuable instrument that we have, this Leo Fender first electric guitar prototype. And we have a letter that Leo Fender himself wrote to Roy Acuff when he decided to donate this to Roy's collection. So that is a really amazing piece of guitar history. Speaking of great guitar history, this beautiful and well-worn Johnny Cash 1956 D28 Martin guitar. That what you don't see in this picture is the tremendous amount of belt rash on the back of this guitar. It was well-loved, well-used. Johnny Cash was photographed playing this guitar, and he played it on a lot of his early recording sessions. So that actually was an acquisition for Marty Stewart. And of course, Porter Wagner jacket. Gotta love those rhinestones. We love the rhinestones at the Grand Ole Opry Archives. And we have a couple of really amazing Porter suits. And what's fun about these suits is that, most of the period photography at the Opry it's black and white. So you don't really get the full flavor of how incredible and how saturated the colors are on these suits and the detail of craftsmanship. So I would strongly suggest, if you haven't seen one of these suits in person yet, do yourself a favor and see. They're really borderline psychedelic. They're really incredible. And to flash forward a little bit into our collection's development, of course, we have the past fairly well represented. But we're looking, and I'm always looking towards how we can build the collection, especially with female representation. It's been a lot of the guys that just the way that the collection has skewed. The artifacts are mostly representing male artists, but I'm making a point of looking for female representation. And Rhonda Vincent, when she was at long last inducted into the Grand Ole Opry, which we were also happy about. And as a woman in bluegrass, she's my shero. She was kind enough to donate this beautiful induction dress that was made by a woman who lives in Westchester, New York, named Constance McCardle. And Constance makes a lot of Rhonda's outfits. So we're lucky to have that. That dress is actually now on display at the Bluegrass Hall of Fame, Bluegrass Music Hall of Fame and Museum in Owensboro, Kentucky. So as far as what we do, we have these things, but what do we do with them? The scope of our archival activities, what keeps me busy, what gets me up in the morning. Our department, as I had mentioned, does a lot of clip licensing and image licensing. I don't personally handle that, but we have a really talented staff. We have a photo archivist and a licensing, someone who takes care of all the contracts and paperwork and what have you. My lane is more in doing the curatorial and collections management side. And so a large part of my job involves curating and assembling the artifact and photo exhibits across the Opry venues. So, because it's not, we have, and you'll see this in a second, but there's actually several spaces that we're responsible for putting out content. And one of them is our backstage tour experience at the Opry House, which is also really great. We have display cases back there and opportunities to show objects. We have a retail store that has a gallery in it, so we can put things on display there. And for the past 3 years, we've utilized what we call the Acuff House, which is Roy Acuff's last former home. When his wife Mildred died, the Opry invited Roy to come and live on the property adjacent to the Opry House, and they built him a beautiful sort of little colonial style 2-story brick building, which has since been converted into a bit of a swing space. Sometimes it's exhibit space, and sometimes it's event space, but we've been kind of commandeering. That's where my show about guests of the Grand Ole Opry is going to go up in May. We also respond to any internal and external research requests. Our social media is pretty vigorous, as you can imagine. And so we're always getting questions about hey, what happened important on this date? Or do we have any milestone moments that we can represent with an artifact or a photograph? And so we're the go-to people, the department that can answer those historic questions, both for our colleagues inside the company and also for external researchers. And then, of course, it's the rank and file day to day. We have a lot of unprocessed material. And that's kind of what keeps me up at night, folks. I will say that. I do love our collections, but there's a tremendous amount of work still to be done. So I'm now in the process of looking for interns. Hint, hint, if anybody knows of someone who wants to come work with me for the next 8 weeks, I am taking applications right now. So yeah, that's pretty much what we do at the archive. And here's just an example of some of our exhibit venues. There's a beautiful Loretta Lynn dress. I'm blanking on the year right now, but this dress is the first dress that she wore after her husband passed away. She had taken a break from performing to caretake for her husband. And when she came back to the Opry, this is the dress that she wore for the first performance for that. So really special to have that. Here's an example of in the retail space, we have Uncle Dave Macon banjo and the chair that he sat in. The story that's connected with this banjo and the chair. I wish we had photographs to verify this, but apparently it was within a few months of Uncle Dave's passing. It was the last performance that he played on the Opry. I believe it was 1952. He came out on stage, sat down in this chair, played that banjo, and then apparently was too weak to get up after his performance to get himself off stage. So family members and staff members came out to help him. They lifted him and the banjo up and off the stage. I think that's actually a really beautiful story that speaks a lot to Uncle Dave's will to perform, and also the fact that he had people around him that cared to help him get off stage. And then we have this beautiful Patsy Cline coat. Oh my gosh. She wore this in 1961, November of 1961, when she and a whole bunch of Opry artists came to Carnegie Hall to play. And so we have photographs of her standing, and sitting at, in the airport at LaGuardia wearing this coat. So that's precious. And our current exhibit that's up for the next few weeks before we strike it and start to install our new one is Opry Loves the 90s. So we are doing a shout out to all the major artists of the 90s, and we have a Vince Gill guitar in our collection. Alison Krauss was kind enough to donate her, not donate, her first Grammy that she had won. We have a Clint Black hat, but of course, Reba, you got your Martina McBride, Alan Jackson, Terry Clark. So that was a fun show to put together. And yeah, just to circle back to the WSM collection, I'm not sure how many of you out there, I don't want to get too in the weeds about archival processing, and I'm happy to answer any questions about that you may have. It came to us out of the transmitter building in Brentwood, which is where the iconic diamond-shaped antenna radio tower is, and so it wasn't very well organized. And I'm kind of working on that, as you can see, sort of my before and after pictures. On the upper part of the box of the Waking Crew. That's all a lot of their sheet music, the band arrangements. They had a live band that would play on the radio, and that was well into the 80s that they did that. And that's all the band charts, the before and after. I found them in big boxes, and then I put them in little boxes that are organized. So if anybody has questions about the WSM collection, I'm happy to answer those. But I think you can kind of get a sense of what's there. For a radio historian, it would be incredible to go through this. And current projects that we're working on right now, I'm proud to say that we have digitized and rehoused every single last one of Les Leverett's negatives. And that's huge for us. We underestimated how many photos this gentleman took. We thought it was in the 50,000, 40,000 range. Turns out it was about 100,000 images. So we spent a lot of money on rehousing materials. And we worked with a fabulous company up in Maryland called Crowley and Associates. And they did an amazing job of digitizing the collection. So now our job, the second phase of that operation, is to add all the metadata to that, to tag the photos so that they're searchable, so that we can find them. The good part about Les's collection is that he was so organized himself. It's just his negative packets are all neatly labeled. So really, it's a one-to-one transcription project, but it's just so many images that it's going to take us probably about a year to do that work. And the other collection that we're currently working on is we've sent out the a Hee-Haw image collection. It's images, on-set images, stills of the actors in skits. And this collection actually, between the plasticizers and the binder and some moisture damage, these things were brought up to the top of the list for conservation work. And then we figured, well, if we're going to do that conservation work, we may as well get the whole collection rehoused properly and into archival acid-free boxes and polyethylene pages, which is a stable kind of plastic. So we are in the midst of working with the Philadelphia Conservation Center on a big project. And hopefully we'll get that collection back later this year. And just to touch on, as fabulous as my job is and as wonderful, to be surrounded by all this history, I feel really enriched and really lucky to have this job. It's not without its challenges. Like every archive, we struggle with our time and our staffing. And in a business context, some of the projects that I might see as important as historically or culturally, if it doesn't align with the business objective of the company, what the company wants to be doing with this material, then that can be kind of I need to kind of pivot around some of that. So I try to balance out, I'm really coming more from an academic cultural historian background. That's kind of my default setting. And so I see the collection through a little bit different of a lens than maybe someone who is in the marketing department or other business activities. But I always try to balance, what I want to be doing with what the company needs me to be doing. And I will say, to mention the 2010 flood and the impact that had on the collection. Maybe some of you might have some questions about that, but just for those of you that aren't aware, in 2010, the Cumberland River, which oxbows its way through Nashville, overflowed its banks well into the Opry House and well into the museum that was adjacent to the Opry House. And as a result, a lot of photos got damaged. We lost a lot of historic documentation and paperwork, and instruments were damaged, just a lot of damage to the collection. And through very valiant efforts and investment on the company's part, I will say a lot of things have been restored. We lost some things for sure, but most of Roy Acuff's instrument collection is intact, so that's good. And with the acquisition of Les Leverett's collection, that's largely restored, what was damaged in that time period. That, we have sort of his photo collection that accrued and amassed over time as he was an employee. But when we acquired all of his negatives, that largely restored the collection. And so just to bounce forward, I'd like to thank you. And I hope this has been an enjoyable, interesting, sort of little bit of a mad dash through the archive. And I look forward to a conversation and questions about what you just saw.
Thank you so much, Jen. That was fascinating. And I went to see all of the nudie suits.
I know.
We've talked often about wanting to do a nudie suit exhibit, so maybe we'll have to work together in the future.
I would love that. I would absolutely love that.
I've
So,
talked a lot about wanting a nudie suit myself, at least to
yeah,
try one on. But
Well, Manuel Cuevas is still active. I mean, he's kind of top dollar, but there are
yeah,
other places that can, put something together for you. That they're
yeah,
expensive though. I do know they're
yes.
expensive.
very much so. What were you going
Yeah.
to say, Renee? I cut you off.
No, I was just going to say, I know that there are a few questions in the chat. So while Scotty's looking at those, I do have one question that I just thought might help clarify things for people who aren't as familiar with the Grand Ole Opry, because you were talking about the exhibit that's coming up about guests at the
Yes.
Grand Ole Opry, and then we've talked about members. So can you just sort of distinguish between those performers at the Opry?
Absolutely. Yeah. Just to clarify that, the Opry has a roster of members, and to be invited into Opry membership, it's a fairly elite. I don't. I should know this number off the top of my head, but it's maybe less than 200 people, or maybe around 200 people at this point. In the history of the Grand Ole Opry, a small portion are selected to be invited to be a member of the Grand Ole Opry, and that has a lot of mystique around it. And I am certainly not even close to that side of the house that makes a decision about who gets invited to be a member. But it usually has something to do with the amount of time someone has performed on the Opry. If they've been performing for years and years, that demonstrates loyalty to the show and to the program and to the ethos. So sometimes it's a person who's been performing like that, or sometimes it's an up and coming artist who, because the Opry tends to have an aging demographic a little bit. So we're trying to sort of maybe bring in some younger artists to sort of have a new generation of country artists and fans coming to see the Opry and investing. But usually there are artists who also really believe in the idea of the Grand Ole Opry as a family. There's certain business expectations, like we love to shoot content with our artist members, so it's a little bit of a promotional tool for us, but it also really is a network and a family of really elite musicians that can say that they're part of that club that goes back to 1925. But that, having said that, the Opry has an amazing history of guest artists, people that come through the show. Sometimes they're even repeating artists, but for example, the show that that I'm putting together is going to include Ray Charles, Steve Martin, James Brown. We have some great audio footage of James Brown on the Opry. Jerry Lee Lewis, never a member of the Grand Ole Opry, but he did a really notorious, memorable performance. Let's see, Chrissy Metz is one of the principal actors from the show This Is Us. Has a country music career, which is beautiful singing voice. So we're going to feature her. She wore an amazing dress for her Opry debut, so we're going to have that. And also presidents and other cultural figures. Andy Warhol visited backstage. Paul McCartney visited backstage and hung out with Roy Acuff. So the Opry is kind of a hub and a magnet for a lot of different kinds of artists.
Well, I'm sure there's been a lot more, but over the last year or so, we've had a couple of local artists who have been guests at the Opry. Amethyst Kia.
Oh my gosh, what a astounding performance that was.
Yes, yeah.
Gorgeous.
Amethyst, and then another one of our friends, Tyler Hughes, was there with a band playing. So we were very excited about that.
That's great.
I think 49 Winchester was there too.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome.
So I know we have some other questions, Scotty, so I'm going to hand over to you.
Yeah. So, and quick plug. So the guitar that Ernest Tubbs holding there is in our, in our core exhibits right now, if anyone hasn't seen it yet and would like to come see it.
And I thought that was a nice way to end my PowerPoint.
Yeah, definitely. And I have a super quick question. So what's the difference in the Grand Ole Opry and the Ryman? Like, if I've been to several shows at the Ryman, so is that a different like a different theater, or is the Grand Ole Opry filmed in the Ryman Auditorium?
Yeah, that's a fair question. the Ryman Auditorium has existed since 1898, and it's a venue. It started out as the Union Gospel Tabernacle, so it actually was the home of oh my gosh, I can't remember. Sam Jones, who is an itinerant preacher, who used the Ryman as a place to preach. And Tom Ryman was the steamboat captain who bankrolled the building of the Ryman. So eventually, when Tom Ryman passed away, Sam Jones said that we should call this not the Union Tabernacle, but the Ryman Auditoriums, named in honor of Captain Tom Ryman. So that venue has its own really interesting and deep history. And quick correction, the Opry was there. The Opry had several homes in and around Nashville proper. And it was in 1943, actually, that the Opry started to, it rented out the Ryman for shows, and it was there until 1974. And so the Ryman, continues on today as a really successful venue for all kinds of music. And so the Grand Ole Opry, what people still call the new Opry House, which was actually opened in March of 1974, was built specifically to house the Grand Ole Opry. And it will very occasionally host other concerts. Cirque du Soleil has been there, like other artists have rented out the Opry House, but it's primarily now the home of the Grand Ole Opry. The Opry, though, I will say, every seasonally they will go down and perform series of shows at the Ryman. So does that help clarify?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I've just always had trouble clarifying that, and I'm glad they call it the new Opry, because that makes me feel good. That means I'm still young.
Right.
So we definitely do have several questions. The first one is from Fred Bartenstein. And
Hi, Fred.
I don't know if it's Steen or Stein. I hope I got it right. But what was your educational preparation for the role that you're in now?
Good question. I have a really eclectic academic background, but I will say that let's see. I have 2 graduate degrees, and the first is an MA in the history of decorative arts, material culture, and design from Bard Graduate Center, which is a school in New York City. And that's where I wrote my master's thesis about the history of the evolution of Western wear, specifically nudie suits. So I spent about 3 years studying Nudie's business archive, looking at sort of the cultural aspects of how did these crazy suits come to be in the post-war era. So I wrote that thesis and then quietly put that on a shelf thinking, well, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with that. And I spent several years sort of bouncing around in grant-funded museum positions, doing various sort of cataloging projects and inventory projects. And when one of my jobs entailed working at the New York Transit Museum, cataloging engineering drawings. And my manager there said, why don't you go back to school and get a library science degree? Most useful thing I ever did. And this is coming from someone who originally has a BFA, which is what brought me to New York City back in 1987 to go to art school. But I ended up chipping away at a library science degree. And then before the ink was dry on my diploma, I hit the jackpot and landed a job at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where I stayed for about 5 years. Working with a really interesting ethnographic photography collection. But when I saw that this job had come up at the Opry, I thought, man, there's no way I can't lose. I wrote my master's thesis about nudie, and I knew that they had a lot of nudie suits and Western wear in the collection. But I think, Fred, the fact that I sing and play country and bluegrass music also informs me just as much as my information mechanic side does. So I think I have a real love and a feel for the material, and also just an in-depth knowledge of the history of country music and bluegrass. So I came to the table at the Opry with sort of both sides of the coin of understanding how to work with a diverse collection, but also understanding what I was looking at musically, culturally.
Yeah, that's a great story, and it seems to be a great fit for you.
Yeah.
So the next one is from Andrew Smith, our next question. And he asked, do you have records of guest appearances going back to 1950? He is trying to determine if an Australian performer who recorded in Nashville in 53 ever appeared on the Opry.
Oh, that's interesting. I wish our business records were a little more complete. We get questions like this a fair amount. And it's really hit or miss, especially going back that far. So you're saying that there was an Australian artist that performed in the 50s?
Yeah, that's what he says.
What's the
Andrew,
artist's name?
Do you know that artist's name, Andrew? Let's see. Tex Morton.
Tex Morton. Well, it's certainly worth a look into the archive. The name doesn't quite ring a bell, although, boy, Tex Morton sounds like a good sort of Western.
Yeah, it almost sounds familiar just because.
Yeah, I know. Tex.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wish we could answer questions, and we get a lot of questions from descendants, like family members, the great granddaughter, great grandson of someone who, older Opry artist who performed maybe in the 40s, and our records just are not complete.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty common issue. Who wants to hold on to paper for that long,
Yeah, our business history is fairly complicated too, and it's been, the administrations have really, over the decades, changed quite a bit. Some being a little less sentimental than others about holding on to historic, paperwork. It's kind of a archivist's nightmare.
Yeah,
seeing the giant gaping holes in the collection, but we also do have a lot of papers yet to be gone through. So I always look forward to opportunities to shake out historical nuggets of information, especially as we come up on our centennial.
Yeah. All right. The next one is from Dave, I guess that's Sichak. And they ask, any plans to make the Opry archives or portions of it available online, perhaps at least to researchers, journalists, etc. And then a second question is, what is the oldest recording of the Opry in the archive? And then he asked about the current archive stored in the flood setting. So we'll start with the first one.
Let's break that down, because those are three very different questions. And
yeah,
Dave,
so just go with the first one, and then I'll pop in with the other two.
Okay. Dave, definitely style points for your backdrop there, I have to say. Congratulations on that. Love it. That looks like the old museum, actually, is it? No? But well done with the barn set there. So I'm sorry. My short-term memory is horrible. The first question?
Stage tour of the Opry at one of those.
Nice. So, Scotty, can you remind me the first question? I got a little sidetracked.
Is there any plans to share portions of the collection online for researchers and journalists, etc.?
I would love it if that were the case. But unlike a cultural institution or an organization whose prime directive is to share and open the doors wide for scholars, the Opry as a business entity tends to put their material into silos that make it a little trickier to find. So I would love to see something like a digital gallery. I think we certainly have that capacity to do, but if it's not I hate to sound so mercenary, but if it's not a revenue generating operation, the Opry kind of looks a little askance at these sort of cultural projects. So there's only so much I can push on that. But I would direct you over to the Country Music Hall of Fame because they have a fabulous website where you can find a lot of interesting pictures. But if you want to come do research, talk to me because we're a little bit of a hidden collection, but that doesn't mean that we don't have jewels to mine. There's really great material for the scholar. And, just to mention that, I am very scholar friendly. I love doing research visits and hosting people. So.
All right. Second part.
Yep. Part 2.
What is the oldest recording of the Opry in your archive?
I wish I knew the hard answer to that. Like the definitive answer. We have someone in charge of our audio materials. And I could probably ask him and find out. But I know that we have live shows. If they're not complete, then they're, at least large parts of shows dating back to the mid 60s. I am not, and there might be something in the WSM collection yet to be discovered that I have not shaken loose from that group of material yet. But I think our audio archive is probably going to begin in the 60s. And then because previous to that, I don't think it was really recorded. The technology wasn't quite there.
Yeah, I mean,
for live recordings.
Yeah, I guess not. I mean, that would be hard for sure. But then tape, I think, was in the late 40s and wouldn't have been widely used until probably sometime late 50s, where people actually had the equipment. So,
well, that said, I will say there are some sources online, and maybe some of you already discovered them if you're deep into Opry history, that there is sort of this whole genre of home recordings, like people that recorded the show and documented it in some form or another on little home reel-to-reel players. And so you can find things that go back to the late 30s, early Bill Monroe performances for you bluegrass people out there. And I don't have a link at my fingertips, but there are some really good sites that have posted that for streaming.
Yeah,
but we don't. That material doesn't come from us.
Yeah. And then the last part of Dave's question is: are the current archives stored in a flood-proof setting?
Absolutely. Actually, the very first thing I was tasked with in 2016 when I arrived is that the company realized that it wasn't really sustainable to send me around to storage units around Nashville to take care of, empty dehumidifiers manually from these storage units that the collection had sort of been dispersed after it had been, treated with conservation treatment and stuff like that. So they decided that they were going to clear out part of their data center, which is where a big room with a hardy HVAC system. They cleared out 2/3 of that space in our corporate headquarters and said, "Here, Jen, bring the collection in, pick out all the shelving you need, set up the archive." And so that's essentially what I spent the rest of 2016 and part of 2017 doing, was building one repository where everything, we have some things stored off site, but 98% of the collection is with us in our corporate building. And we are well above the floodplain. We have this beautiful, gorgeous, overlooking view of the Cumberland River. And my big joke is like, if we have a flood issue up on this hill, then we should start building an ark, and we have bigger problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Instead of animals, you'll have to take 2 of every recording or every
suits. Yes, boots, Hank Williams boots. Yeah. But it's all climate controlled, which is fabulous. It's cold for human beings, but perfect for objects, and humidity controlled. So I feel good about where the collection is now.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So, and then Fred just has a comment, and I feel like Renee, you can chime in too. Have we heard this before? Sarah Carter told a British interviewer that the original Carter family traveled to Nashville and appeared once as guests, but you still haven't found documentation of that mystery.
No, that question has been floating around and yeah, we've had that discussion before. And I just wish we had. Wouldn't that be wonderful to know? To
That
have
would be
some
a real treasure to find.
Oh, I know, because it's all very plausible. It sounds quite likely that happened, but just, yeah, boy, if we only had the logbooks or somebody took a photograph. It's kind of like that Elvis, that one sort of notorious Elvis appearance on the Opry too. Like, where's the photo? Somebody must have a photo somewhere, but yeah, we have not determined. But it's compelling, the story that Fred has found about that is compelling for sure.
Definitely. And then Andrew had just one more comment about it says, I understand regarding guest artist, specifically, do you have, it says live files relating to guest appearances, or how maybe you could track down Australians that visited the Opry.
Right.
He says he's after files, etc., of their appearances, and that's regarding the Tex Morton.
Yeah, I am curious about that. I mean, the first place I would look is our photo files to see if we had a Tex Morton photo file, but because I think it would be notable. It went in the 1950s. Is that what we're talking?
Yeah.
Yeah, that it would be pretty notable if an Australian country artist performed on the Opry. I would also go to newspapers.com. That subscription has actually helped me fill in a lot of information, or at least find some kind of research thread. So there might have been some news press, in Nashville at the time, or if he was on a package show of some sort in the Southeast, it might be worth it to look into newspapers.com and see if there's any press, because I think it would be pretty notable if an Australian country artist blew into Nashville in the 50s.
Yeah, I would like to know that.
That'd be pretty cool. Yeah.
I'm curious. And I just popped a link into newspapers.com into the chat.
Oh, good.
And so Sheldon Tennant, you've kind of answered this, but are there any archive images available online anywhere? Yeah.
I really wish I had a better answer for that, but I would say the Grand Ole Opry Archives website has a few things. Honestly, if you go into the PBS, Ken Burns, if you can find the PBS website, I think they did a good job of kind of showcasing some of the photographers and some of the work. So that might be the closest thing to an online gallery of being able to click, because we apparently have the distinction of having the Opry has the distinction of licensing hundreds of images. So chances are, if you're looking at an image, especially as it pertains to Nashville country music, it probably came from us. So that might be a place to kind of scoot around and look. But yeah, no digital galleries. And I really wish we did have that.
Okay, this is the last question for now, at least. So Casey Nicholson says, I'm someone who is researching a family member who played the Opry in the 40s.
Yep.
And so the discussion about the availability of show records from that era is relevant for him. But that said, if such records are not kept by you, the Opry, is there a source that someone could look at to find such a show record? For example, would the show bills have been advertised regularly in the Tennessean or another paper like your newspapers.com, or a publication that might be preserved on microfilm or somewhere else?
Oh, that's a good question. I wish I knew of a really complete source for Opry programs, but I don't. That material seems to kind of like, it's fairly atomized. We have clusters of it. Very little of it goes back to the 40s, though, because people on our side, business-wise, were not collecting the programs from the shows. Up until a certain point, I think maybe the early 40s, I've noticed that the newspaper listings for the Opry would actually list the performers individually before it just became WSM, Grand Ole Opry as a broadcast. So depending on how early you're going back in time, you might be able to find somebody's name listed there. But I think it's probably by the early 40s that comes to an end. Geez, I wish I could point you in a good direction, but that information is, you kind of have to dig around for it.
Yeah, well, actually, Dave chimed in and said,
"Oh, good,
Casey, if you didn't see this yet, there's a message in the chat. It says that he has a copy of the Tennessean and Nashville Banner Opry radio listings from 1925 through 1950.
There you go.
And he may be able to help you, and he's left his email address in there.
That's great. I do also know of a there, and maybe some of you are familiar with this too. I've not gone to see it. I think it's at the library downtown in Nashville. Is that there is a radio log. There was somebody that documented, it was either like very consistently either the Friday night or the Saturday night show, I think maybe in the 50s and 60s. I'd have to go back and remember. But, there are these instances where people, it's really sometimes sort of crowdsourced, I guess you could say, that people, it's sort of like the home recordings. This one individual, I can't think of his name right now, was very detailed in writing down who was playing at the Opry. So, it's definitely worth it to check out library and archive sources for any kind of WSM, Opry logs or anything like that.
All right. And then Fred popped in about the Australian artist and found a link of where something says Reg Lindsay was the first Aussie to play on the Grand Ole Opry in '68. As far as that,
sounds like Tex might have gotten there first.
He may have. That would be awesome to find out.
I know, wouldn't it? I love that.
But yeah, that's all the everything that I see in here. So.
Well, and I have another question, Scotty, that I was holding off till the end to sort of go back to the artifacts. And it's because of, you were talking about some of the scripts and those types of things that were left behind from the Minnie Pearl collection that had like jokes written and notes about that. And we are about to open up a new special exhibit at the museum on women in old time music. And so I wondered about, with Minnie Pearl, do we know how much she wrote of her own jokes, or were they being scripted by someone else? And the reason why I ask is because we have a clip in our permanent exhibits in the museum, because Tennessee Ernie Ford is from Bristol, and so we do have some in our museum about that. And there's a wonderful clip when Minnie Pearl was on the Ernie Ford show, primetime show. And I have seen that clip probably 1 million times now that I've worked at this museum for 10 years. And it still makes me laugh out loud because she's so funny.
Oh, she's brilliant.
Every single time I see it, I laugh. Even though I know what's going to happen. I know what the punchline is, all of that. So I just wondered, do we know how much she was writing her own jokes? Or is there anything in those records that would tell us that?
I would love to learn more, frankly, about that. What I've seen is evidence of her editing jokes. And we have a whole box that I haven't gone through, but I'm about to, because I'm about to do a little display backstage about the history of comedians, because we just inducted Gary Muledeer and Henry Cho, the first comedians to be inducted in the last 20 or 30 years, something like that. So I wanted to go back and sort of sift through some Minnie Pearl stuff. But yeah, the evidence is there that she drafted some things. The scripts are typewritten or sort of mimeographed. So I don't know who was in control of that, but I certainly see evidence where she's editing things, changing lines of dialogue. So she certainly had some agency, even if she wasn't always the creator. And those scripts go back to, the late 40s, early 50s. So as her career evolved, I imagine that she really was more responsible, as time went on, for generating her own material.
Right.
I'd be curious, she had sort of this great chemistry with Rod Brasfield, and she sort of played the straight woman to his goofball. So I wonder how much they would kind of work out, or maybe some of it. I think she was a really incredible improviser too. So that is sort of a form of writing on the fly. So even if she didn't always have a script, I think on the Opry, she had to pivot quickly, depending, if she had to pad to fill time or, tighten something up. So she kind of edited, and created in the moment, which is pretty incredible.
Well, it looks like that's all of our questions for the night. I just want to say a huge thank you to you, Jen, for being with us for this program. It's been so interesting. It makes me want to come dig around and be your intern for that 8 weeks.
Yes.
I wonder if I can get a leave of absence from the Birthplace of Country Music.
Just a little leave of absence. Yeah.
But also a big thank you to our audience. So many of you stopped in, but you all had some great questions, and we really appreciate that deep interest in the topic. Like I said earlier, we will be sending out that feedback survey, and we'd love to hear people's thoughts on tonight's program. We do have another speaker series that's a monthly event. So our next one will be held in person and via Zoom on Tuesday, April 11th at 7 p.m. And we will have members of the Barter Theater, which is the State Theater of Virginia, talking to us about their revival of Keep on the Sunny Side, a wonderful play about the Carter family that is coming back to the Barter for the spring season. And they will be talking to us and hopefully maybe performing a couple of songs from it for that speaker session. So that's April 11th. So be sure and join us then.
Hey, I'm going to jump in before you go into upcoming events. Dave wants to know if you would share your email address, Jen.
Yeah, sure.
The chat.
Yeah, let me just jump into the chat. And I apologize, just for the sake of my just being able to keep focus. I did not open the chat. So if I missed a comment, I apologize. There's sort of a lot going on here for me at this end.
Yeah, there were a couple, and they were all just, that they really enjoyed it. So
yep. I just see a comment from Rose that, yeah, Uncle Dave Macon was in bad health. It was very close to when he passed away, that last Opry performance. So I'm going to put my email in the chat. It's jlarson@opry.com. So, and hopefully everyone can see that.
There it is.
Yep.
And they're asking for a sequel presentation.
Hey, all right.
Well, I've already thought of 2 or 3 from what you talked about, the WSM, the Les Leverett.
Yes.
I think we will have Jen back with us one day. So watch this.
Oh, and I would love to do what was the radio station in Nashville?
WSM?
No, the
WLAX.
LAS. Is it LAX? Or
oh, yeah. LA. Is it LAS?
LAC. Wait.
But it was the early rival of WSM. And I think WSM pulled a lot of artists from that other radio station that back in the early days.
Rivalries.
That Clear Channel, that was quite a rodeo. It was the early days of how that was established and how WSM rose up so quickly to become one of the big dogs in Clear Channel radio. What a fascinating story.
Yes, definitely.
Well, I know someone who used to be a college photo professor here and says that he used to get WLAC is what it is.
WLAC.
He used to pick them up in Puerto Rico.
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh. And we have such interesting correspondence around all that. That was kind of an eye opener because I guess other radio stations complained a lot about WSM sort of with, operating with their elbows out and sort of gobbling up the airwaves and things like that.
Well, and I was going to just say, speaking of, there's a couple of people who have been on this presentation that I want to just give a shout out to. Dave, who's asked several questions, and also I think Nancy Cardwell was on here for a while, both of whom helped us find images for the Women in Old Time exhibit. So it's great to see you guys here with us tonight.
Hey, Alan, I see you there, and that's a beautiful shot of Minnie.
Oh yeah,
Alan's a fantastic photographer, and
yes,
yep.
We have I think we've used a photograph from Alan in the past for one of our other special exhibits.
Great.
Yeah, I knew I recognized the name. So
yeah. Well, again, Jen, thank you so much for those pleasure. Of you who are local. Just a few upcoming events that you might be interested in. We have our Farm and Fun Time at the Paramount on March 16th. So that's this
wow.
Thursday at 7 p.m. Tickets are still available. Performers are Sam Bush and Annabelle's Curse. For those of you who are not local, you can actually access that on Facebook Live. So check that out. Then on Thursday, March 23rd at 12 noon, we have our Radio Bristol Book Club on Radio Bristol. We're talking about Jessica Wilkerson's book, To Live Here, You Have to Fight, How Women Led Appalachian Movements for Social Justice, appropriate for Women's History Month. Our new exhibit, I've Endured Women in Old Time Music, and that's I've Endured, Women in Old Time Music, just to be clear, opening on March 23rd, and we're going to have lots of related programming over the coming months. Our Bluegrass Jam is on Saturday, March 25th from 2 to 5 p.m. That is free and open to the public, both musicians and audience. And then finally, on Friday, April 7th at 10:30 a.m., we have our monthly museum story time for tiny tots and their grown-ups, where we will be we'll be reading Come a Tide and having a sing-along with our very own Mama Molasses. So those are some things to look forward to. If you are interested in more of the Birthplace of Country Music Museum's programming, please go onto our website, which is birthplaceofcountrymusic.org, and sign up for our newsletter to find out what's coming next. And again, join me in giving a huge thank you and for such a wonderful and interesting presentation from Jen tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. What a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jen.
And bye, everyone. Join us
Good night.
next month.
Yep. Take care. Bye-bye.